Welcome and thanks for attending today. My name is Kyle Zelner and I'm an associate professor of history and a co-director of the Dale Center for the Study of War and Society here at Southern Miss. It has also been my privilege for the past 2 years to be the project supervisor on the 103rd Infantry Division Digital Humanities Project. So I'm going to be moderating today's event. Before we get started, if you have any questions during our presentation or during the Q&A portion of the presentation later, please put them into the question and answer box on your Zoom screen. I also want to just let everyone know that we are recording today's event for those people who can't be here today in case they wanted to see it. Before we get too far into our presentation, I do want to give a little bit of background on how the 103rd Infantry Division archive and website came to us at USM. In 2015, the Dale Center was asked by the 103rd Infantry Division Association, a dedicated group of veterans and their families, if we would be willing to take over the association's extensive collection of World War II documents and their website. The veterans had made a decision almost at the beginning of the post-war period, almost as soon as the war left, to start collecting documents, doing interviews, doing oral histories, anything they could to preserve the story of the division and the soldiers that fought in it. They really wanted to ensure that the history of what they had done and also the sacrifices that their comrades had made would not be forgotten, but instead would actually be preserved, and not only preserved, but would be the basis for students and researchers in the future. So they had started to amass this collection very early on. The association basically came to the Dale Center for two reasons. One, we are one of the leading military history programs in the country. But two, probably more importantly, we had a family connection. Dale Center fellow Dr. Ken Swope, his grandfather had actually fought in the 103rd Division. His grandfather's name was Clarence Mike Swope, and he had also been very active in the Veteran Association, as was his son, Tom Swope. And so in 2015, they asked us if we would host their archive for future generations to have access to. We were not only honored by that, but we thought it was a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to have materials for teaching, but also for our graduate students, and not only that, but for outside researchers. So we jumped at the chance of hosting this wonderful archive. In 2015, the association actually held its annual meeting or its annual reunion here in Hattiesburg, and 11 World War II veterans and several family members journeyed to the town to officially hand over the collection of the documents and the website. They were here for several days, and we were able to do oral histories with them, and they visited the special collections unit at university libraries to visit where that archive would end up and talk to the archivists and librarians there. It was a really special meeting. And so University Archives started working on the collection. The Dale Center took over the association's original website and kind of got it up and running again, and all seemed to be fine. Until last year, in 2022, when we realized that that old website was simply not fulfilling its needs anymore, fulfilling its promise anymore, and we could no longer update it. So in 2022, the faculty fellows of the Dale Center decided to actually launch what we are now calling the 103rd Infantry Division Digital Humanities Project, which we've been working on now since about May of 2022. And we have basically spent the last year and a half building up a brand new website and an interactive story map of the division's history. We officially launched the website on October 6th of this year, which was the anniversary, 79 years to the day of when the division had launched from New York Harbor to join the fight in France on the Allied side during World War II. So we thought that was a fitting day to actually launch the website. We actually decided on today's date for this presentation, November 15th, because November 15th, 1944, again, 79 years ago today, was one of the first really heavy combat days for the division in France. They were engaged in a major offensive in France to drive the German army back from the Moselle River. And it was November 15th was a day of very heavy fighting and casualties. But by the end of the day, the division had triumphed and pushed the German army out, and the division captured the town of St. D. And we thought this anniversary made today a perfect day to kind of highlight the division's history and also this new project that is centered around that division's history. Before we get too much farther, I do want to introduce the project team that has been doing most of the work on this amazing digital humanities project. I'm going to start with Sarah Ann Hogue over here. I don't know if you want to wait. Sarah is a PhD student at Southern Miss, and also she is the Pat and Jean Welsh Graduate Fellow for the Dale Center this year. Sarah has also been the project director of the entire project since it started in 2022. And quite frankly, we could not have done this project without her. She has been in charge of every aspect of the project, managing the teams, both this year's team and the team the year before, and has really covered an amazing amount of ground. And for someone whose specialty is actually women in the colonial American period, women in 17th century New England to be specific, it's amazing how much she has come to know about World War II and the 103rd Division. I'm working very hard to make sure that she doesn't switch her project on. Next, we have James Witkoski here. James is also a PhD student in the Dale Center. He is a web content manager and a writer for the project. And will tell you a little bit about what some of the specific things he worked on a little later. Before he came to USM, he got his master's degree in history at Rowan University in New Jersey, where he also specialized in Holocaust and genocide education, which is a really valuable asset in telling the 103rd story, as you will hear about in a little while. He is planning on writing his dissertation on the Vietnam War, especially intelligence and intelligence failures during that conflict. And then last but not least, we have Nick Garrett on the team. Nick is a master's student here in the Dale Center at Southern Miss. He was also a web content manager and writer this summer. Nick was working on a master's degree on World War I, but his interest and experience working on the 103rd project basically made him switch his project. And so he is now actually going to be working on a master's thesis about one of the infantry regiments in the 103rd Infantry that he has tentatively entitled The Misfits: Experiences of the 409th Infantry Regiment in World War II. So we got one student to switch already. I think that actually the men and women of the Veterans Association and the families would be really proud to know that based on their decision years ago to start collecting all these materials and send them to us, that it has paid off with new scholarship being done, and we're absolutely sure that Nick's will not be the last word in the 103rd's history. We think that this is just the beginning of a host of new projects written out of this archive and out of this website. I also want to introduce and thank Maeve Lowson from the Southern Miss's Center for the Study of the Digital Humanities? No, Center for Digital Humanities, sorry about that. Maeve is the manager there. She's also a Dale Center alumna. She even did a World War II New Deal project of all things, so that fits really, really well. Maeve and the Center for Digital Humanities has been instrumental as our partner from the very beginning on this project, and we can't thank her enough. So now I want to actually kind of launch in, now that I've talked probably far too long, I want to launch in a little bit and start talking about the project itself. And we want to focus at first about some of the history that we've learned about the division in different aspects. So I'm going to start off by asking Nick to talk a little bit about the kind of formation of the division and also its training before it got into combat.
So the 103rd was created as a new unit in the newly created Organized Reserve after the National Defense Act of 1920. 103rd Division headquarters were established in Denver, Colorado on August 31st, 1921, and the division was assigned a home area of the states of Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. Briefly, in 1922, the division was nicknamed the Rocky Mountain Division. However, this was quickly replaced with the Cactus Division to correspond with the unit's new patch. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, the division participated in annual reserve training sessions, but they remained inactive after the United States entry into World War II. Things would rapidly change in November of 1942 once the division was transferred to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. After arriving to the camp, General Order Number 1 was issued on November 15th, 1942, which activated the 103rd for military service. And as Dr. Zelner stated earlier, so 2 years later on the same day, the men of the 103rd were making their first major assault of the war. To solve the lack of manpower, which plagued the division throughout the interwar period of 1919 to 1941, men from the 85th Division, which is located at Camp Shelby in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and induction centers from 9 different states were transferred to the 103rd while they were stationed at Camp Claiborne. Men of the 103rd would stay at Camp Claiborne for just over a year and undergo physical training and basic combat training, where infantrymen were learning basic squad tactics of attack and defense. Artillerymen were taught the tasks of indirect fire support, and engineers were trained in building fortifications and demolition jobs at the engineer training school, specifically at Camp Claiborne. However, on November 24th, 1943, the 103rd was transferred to Camp House, Texas, and supplemented with more draftees and also men from the Army Specialized Training Program and the Army Air Corps Cadet Program. So just briefly, the Army Specialized Training Program was basically a chance for enlisted men to attend college and gain a higher level of education in the hopes that they would be commissioned as an officer. However, the program was canceled in February of 1944, and the men who joined the program with the hopes of becoming officers were transferred back into the infantry and became privates. And the Army Air Corps Cadet Program was an intense training school where enlisted men were given the chance to become pilots. However, if they failed flight school, they were sent back to the infantry. So that's how the 103rd gained a lot of its men at Camp House. So while at Camp House, they received further physical training and also advanced infantry training, which included glider infantry qualification. Of note, they would never use that training during the war. And the men are also working to build sort of unit cohesion, as a lot of these new they were termed college boys from the ASCP, were assigned to the division. On September 28th, 1944, the 103rd was transferred to Camp Shanks, New York, for final preparations before embarking for Europe. So at Camp Shanks, men received medical examinations and were lectured on topics such as the treatment of enemy prisoners and how to respond during interrogations in the event that they were captured. And October 6th, 1944, the 103rd departed for Europe aboard the USS Henry T. Gibbons, USS General J.R. Brooke, USS Monticello, and USS Santa Maria.
So next we're going to have Sarah talk a little bit about the military documents produced by the division and also their usefulness for researchers.
Right, so one of the nice things about the military is they're very good at keeping their records. And so many of the details we know about the 103rd Infantry Division, like Nick just discussed, for the pre-war period and during their time in combat, actually come from these military records. And for both training and combat, these detailed records, many archives have paper copies of these records that researchers can access. There are actually few digitized copies that are easily accessible for researchers. And that's one of the nice things about our collection and the website itself. And we want to thank as well the 103rd Association members who worked very diligently to digitize these documents originally. The 103rd Infantry Division Association archivists, Zach Sigler and Larry Wayne. And I wanted to briefly discuss today some of these documents that you may see on screen and kind of give a brief background about what's contained in these documents and what they recorded during the war and how researchers can use those documents today. So as you can see here, we have a variety of documents, starting with the division muster list, which is a complete list of every member of the division, including their assigned service number and their assigned unit. This is very useful for researchers who are looking for a specific member of the division because it's sorted by last name and you can very easily find the soldier that you're looking for, find some information about what company or regiment they were assigned to, and even see what their assigned service number is, which is useful if you're looking for them in other research places. You often need that to find them through their military records. Additionally, we also have the general orders, which is a formal record of any major changes in the division, including any changes in command, activation of a unit, any awards that were received by soldiers, and even the daily schedules of the division. Next, we have the morning reports, which record any important daily changes, such as the location and movement of the division for the day, a list of daily commanders, and any such major events or combat from the day, such as troop gains or troop losses. And then if we scroll down just a little bit, we can see some of the other documents available here as well, including our combat and after action reports. And those detail each combat engagement of the division, and then it is reviewed by the division to see any major tactical errors and try and correct those in the future. So researchers can also see a little bit there about the lessons that were learned from combat experiences. We next have our casualty reports, which is a list of the POWs, MIAs, WIAs, and KIAs, as well as the location of any prisoners of war that were held, and additionally, in some cases, any soldiers that were killed in action, a record of their burial location. Administrative records is still a work in progress for us right now. As of right now, we have some limited reports on there, but that is one of the categories, as we'll discuss towards the end of the meeting, that we'd like to add more to in the future. And so next we can see we have our unit journals, and that's a log of each individual unit of the division's daily position, their movements, communications, and any combat actions that they were involved in. And as well, we see right there our advanced infantry officer course reports. And those are a unique, we have a limited amount of those documents, but they're a very unique resource there. They're essentially summaries of the combat experiences of various 103rd Infantry Division officers after the war. And so these were usually written within the 5 years immediately following the war, and they create case studies of the division's combat experience to train incoming officers. So these documents were used to create multiple historical web pages for the division, including a page on the general and field officers of the division that outlines all of the commanders involved in the combat experience. But perhaps most interestingly, these documents actually help us to map out day by day the division's combat timeline. And so we actually use that as part of this project to create a digital story map, which is an interactive set of maps that track the movement of the division throughout their days in combat, which you can see pictured here. This is actually today's date and then tomorrow's date right here. And this story map will actually show you the division's movements. And then we have a picture when we could find one of the related area or soldiers in that area from the 103rd Infantry Division. And then additionally, we have a brief summary, which you can see under the date of all of the information we have for the 103rd Infantry Division, but also as well for any of the regiments or individual companies that were involved in combat in a different area. So what is very useful for researchers who are interested in either researching the 103rd Infantry Division for an academic project, or even relatives or genealogists who are interested in learning more about soldiers, is that these documents provide a record of the division as a whole, but they also additionally mention individual soldiers. So it can be very helpful for family members or genealogists who are interested in studying the World War II history of a specific veteran. potentially seeing where that veteran was involved in combat, what their combat experience would have looked like, and even to see any awards that that veteran won. Even if you do not have a specific veteran listed in these reports, it can also be useful for getting a general idea of what that veteran may have been involved in with his regiment or company, and seeing more of what that experience would have looked like.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. Next, we're going to have Jimmy talk a little bit about the Holocaust history of the 103rd Infantry Division.
So, as the 103rd advanced into Germany, the men of the division stumbled upon direct evidence of the evil realities of the Nazi regime, and in doing so became one of the 36 U.S. Army divisions designated as a Holocaust Liberator Unit. On April 27, 1945, the soldiers of the 103rd Infantry Division, while patrolling near Landsberg, Germany, came across Kaufering 1 concentration camp. Behind the barbed wire fence, thousands of emaciated, sick, and dying concentration camp inmates were in disbelief that American soldiers had arrived and that their many years of torture had finally come to an end. For many soldiers of the 103rd, the conditions of those imprisoned at Kaufering, as well as the camp itself, were some of the most horrific scenes that they witnessed in the entire war. Those who were liberated from Kaufering 1 on April 27th were among millions of Europeans who have been imprisoned in the concentration camp system, to be systematically murdered either slowly through slave labor or quickly as part of the final solution. The inmates of Kaufering comprised of Jews, Roma Sinti, Poles, Slavs, homosexuals, communists, or any other category of people that were deemed undesirable under Nazi ideology. Kaufering 1 was part of the subcamp system of Dachau concentration camp. Subcamps such as this were normally created near work sites. Inmates were used as slave laborers until they died from exhaustion or were sent back to the main camps to be murdered. The inmates of Kaufering 1 were used to help build airplanes for the Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, in massive underground cave complexes. The working conditions, as some survivors recalled, were terrible. The inmates labored underground or in the caves for around 12 hours each day, and were given rations so small that they were not designed to sustain human life. When the 103rd discovered Kaufering 1, the soldiers and medical personnel of the division scrambled to provide adequate food, water, and medical care to the newly liberated inmates. However, as in other liberated camps throughout Europe, hundreds of those who've been freed ultimately did not survive past their first few days of liberation because their health conditions were simply too dire. For those who survived, however, the memory of the 103rd and the cactus patch stayed with them for the remainder of their lives. One such survivor, Edward Grusin, vividly recalled in a letter sent to the Unit Association and published in a newsletter in the early 2000s, the almost dreamlike sight of American GIs opening the gates, providing him, quote, the whitest bread he had ever seen, and ending the nightmare that he and his father had endured for years. Grusin's story and letter are also immortalized in part 1 of the Cactus Men audio files, which can be found under the soldiers' personal accounts and oral histories page on the website. In 1985, the precursor organization to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Center for Military History, through the urgings of certain survivors, began recognizing U.S. Army divisions as Holocaust liberators. The 103rd Infantry Division was among the first 10 divisions recognized and designated as a Holocaust Liberator Unit that same year.
Thanks, Jimmy. So we're gonna move and shift just a little bit our focus to focusing on different questions about, different features of the website. And so Sarah is going to talk a little bit about our user guide and the kind of original goals of the project.
So one of the first things that we did when we started this project in 2022 was actually inventory all of the existing documents and the web pages on the previous website because we wanted to ensure that we did not lose any of that material and that we could preserve that material for future users. We also really wanted to keep our audience in mind as we redesigned this project. And so as you can see on the screen right here, one of the first things we did was try and imagine who would be a potential user of this site. So we thought about potentially veterans and relatives using this site and the goals that they would most likely have for using the site. We also thought about students, including graduate students and undergraduate students who may use this project for research. We also thought potentially that genealogists might use this site to locate specific veterans and find out more information about them for any kind of genealogical research. And we even thought about how academic researchers outside of students might use this site as well. So with that in mind, we took the existing collection of historical information and digitized documents and personal accounts, and we organized the website into 6 specific sections. We have a pre-war section dedicated to the training of the division before they were shipped overseas to Europe. We also have a wartime combat history, which gives specific details about things like the story map, where you can actually follow the division day by day and see their experience in combat, and even gives some historical information, such as what we just heard about from Jimmy as the unit's role as a Holocaust liberator unit. Additionally, we have a section of the site that we will not cover much today, but is very important about units of the division. And that looks more at the individual regiments and companies that made up the 103rd Infantry Division, how they were organized and what their specific tasks were within the unit. And then we also have a section dedicated to wartime documents that I talked about previously that actually has those documents organized so that users can easily see those. We also have a section on personal accounts, which Nick is actually going to talk more about in the future of this conversation. And that personal accounts section actually shows the different types of personal accounts from soldiers of the division and lets users see where they might find their relatives or even a project if they're interested, for example, in researching the 409th Infantry Regiment. We have that visible so they can see which soldier was a part of that unit. And then our final section is actually a post-war information section. And so that contains information about the 103rd Infantry Division Memorial Association, and that also contains the association's records. So we actually have a list of all of their meeting locations listed on that page, and as well as that list of annual meeting locations. We also have their records, the news from the Cactus Patch newsletter that were usually sent out 3 times per year. And so once we had divided the website into that section, we kept that navigation in mind and tried to make this easier for users to move through the website as possible, as you can see here, so that it was very easy to kind of figure out what you were looking for and where to go. We also, with that in mind, created the user guide. And so while this is not an end-all be-all list of possible research that people might be interested in, it is a starting place. So it gives a user who is accessing this collection for the first time an idea of the best places to start, where they might find some information they're looking for. And we even expanded some of the historical information included on certain web pages and created new web pages with extended historical information and information about the background of the division, so that a user who might not be as familiar with military history or the 103rd Infantry Division could easily have the information they needed to guide their research and understand what they were looking at. We did all this to help users who are not familiar with the history of World War II or not familiar with military terminology, for example, in hopes that this would help them better understand the research that they were doing and possible resources that they might use as well. And this includes, as you could see on the Holocaust page and some other pages, we actually included outside links for people to go to and read more information if we do not have all of that listed on the website as well.
Great. Now we're going to have Jimmy talk a little bit about creating a very important piece of the website, the glossary, to help you understand everything.
So one of my goals working on the website was how to make the documents and military jargon more understandable for visitors who might not be versed in military terminology. And specifically, in this case, 1940s military terminology. Many of the sources that Sarah just discussed on the website are either original documents or transcriptions of the original text. These original documents and transcriptions, while extremely valuable, can also be overwhelming for many potential visitors to the site. To help make these documents more accessible, I spent substantial time combing through them and creating two separate glossaries. The first is a general glossary for the entire site. And the second is a glossary specifically dedicated to the morning reports that Sarah had just discussed. The glossary for the main site will be helpful for readers who might be looking at the casualty reports, general orders, or most of the other documents on the document collection page. Some of the common terms that might be found in these documents are KIA, meaning killed in action, MIA, meaning missing in action, or POW, meaning prisoner of war. However, there are also more unique terms, such as SWA, or seriously wounded in action, and NBC, or non-battle casualty, in the general glossary to help audiences. The terms from the morning reports were slightly more complicated and specialized, and therefore called for their own reading aid. In the morning reports, for example, the capitalization or lowercase letters of acronyms carry significant meaning. A common example in many morning reports is the letters FR. In this example, FR in uppercase letters means France, while FR in lowercase means from. To help compile this morning report glossary, Nick found a partial glossary originally created by the veterans of the 103rd while they worked for the unit association amongst the archival collection and shared that to help get me started. At other times, I had to rely on outside resources and even in some cases my own military experience to help develop the current glossaries.
Thanks, Jimmy, that's really helpful. Nick spent quite a bit of this summer actually working on personal accounts, oral histories, and dealing with the multiple audio files that we have. So if you could talk a little bit about that, it would be great.
So fortunately, we have a wealth of personal accounts from members of the 103rd on the website, which include oral histories from USM Center for Oral History and the collection at the Library of Congress, as well as interviews, diaries, and memoirs. So these types of resources are incredibly useful as they allow the voices of the veterans of the 103rd to continue to be heard. This is the case in a literal sense with the oral histories as they are audio recordings, as opposed to a structured interview with guided questions crafted by an interviewer. Oral histories allow the individual to tell their story however they want to do so. Depending on the individual, our audio files range from 20 to 30 minutes, or they can be over an hour long. So these audio files can be useful for family members who want to gain insight into the wartime experiences of relatives who may have been reluctant to speak about a difficult time in their lives. Another useful resource are the transcribed interviews we have in the collection that are organized by last name and then unit. And we have these interviews were recorded at division reunions throughout the early 2000s. However, due to their structured nature, it was decided that they should be placed on their own webpage within the website. Finally, we have diaries and memoirs, and those were also placed on different pages within the website due to the nature of the source. So a diary is something written during the war, whereas a memoir contains things that are written in some cases well after their wartime experiences. So for clarification, we had to put those on different website pages within the website. And as mentioned before, these personal accounts are useful for research purposes. So in correlation with the document collection. So in my own research on the 409th, I was basically having to look at personal accounts such as interviews and then referencing things such as morning reports and unit journals to gain sort of a broad idea of what these men were talking about, and then using a personal account to supplement the larger story that was being told.
Great, and then Sarah wanted to finish up on this section talking about kind of future digitization projects we're thinking of undertaking.
Right, so in the future, we would love to be able to expand the historical information on this website, as well as the various documents and personal accounts that we can offer here. So one of the things that Nick talked about when discussing personal accounts were diaries, which are really a rare resource for the 103rd and any World War II division, because technically there was a prohibition against keeping a diary during combat. But we have a couple of diaries that were either kept in secret during the war, or we've also considered accounts that were written very near to the end of the war, either from notes or personal accounts that were remembered as a diary or journal as well. And that's one of the things that's been really useful for researchers on the site, to be able to see that in contrast with memoirs, which may have been written a little bit longer after the war, but someone who's interested in how memory of war is studied, for example, find those useful as well. One recent update to the project that will actually be going live in the near future to keep an eye out for is the digitization of the 103rd Infantry Division's Army Specialized Training Program roster. And that's actually a list of all the men who served in the 103rd Infantry Division that were first part of the ASTP before the program's cancellation. And that roster includes the name of that man who served in the ASTP and was transferred to the 103rd Infantry Division, the university that he attended as part of the ASTP, and his unit assignment within the 103rd Infantry Division. And that's very useful for someone who is interested in researching a family member who may have been part of the 103rd's ASTP unit, as well as researchers who are interested in researching the 103rd and the soldiers who came from the ASTP to be part of that division. We also have other materials that we would hope to digitize in the future that we have access to right now, and these include historical photographs, which will be updated to the website soon. We just need to make sure that the quality of those images is up to our standards. And we would also like to update, as we discussed earlier, various administrative records related to the division that we already have, including, for example, some limited payroll rosters. We also have a few assorted diaries and oral histories that we are working on digitizing at the moment that we would like to add to the collection. I also wanted to talk a little bit today about the things that we do not currently have on the website to digitize that we would hope would possibly be donated to our collection in the future. So, for example, we do not have many wartime diaries, photographs, memoirs, and other personal accounts from soldiers. And so we would always love to add more personal accounts and photographs to the site, if at all possible, if anyone has those out there. We would also be very interested in potentially adding letters, Vmail, or telegrams that were correspondence between soldiers and their family members during the war. We do have one or two of these within our collection that we're hoping to digitize in the future. But we don't have very many of them, and they do tell an important insight about soldiers' wartime experience and their relationship with family members during the war. As Nick mentioned, personal accounts and documents like diaries, letters, and even memoirs help give detailed personal wartime experiences and detail the emotions of soldiers during World War II and what their life was like in combat. They provide a firsthand account of the war that can be particularly useful to family members who are looking for information about their relatives, or even researchers who are interested in learning more about and preserving the story of the 103rd Infantry Division, which is, of course, our ultimate goal here.
Great, so we wanted to make sure that during this presentation, we had a chance for anyone to ask questions. So if you have a question, you can put it in the question and answer box. And do we have a certain question?
One question so far.
Okay.
Which we will answer live. Matt King asks, has the after action report been posted online?
Yes, so we have posted under the combat and after action report section of the documents, all of the after action reports that we have digitized copies of at this time. We may have some additional copies of these that have not yet been digitized that are paper copies in our archive. But we're still, the collection is so massive that we have created an inventory of things that we hope to digitize in the near future and are slowly working through that, but it just takes time.
Yeah,
Quick question.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm referring to the what I'll call the yearbook that the division published in Innsbruck after the war.
Yes, I think,
That is still in the archives as an
Yes.
archival piece. I mean, we do have plans over the next several years to start digitizing the pieces that are archival only at this point. If someone wanted to use that for research, of course, right now, they would have to come to the Southern Miss Special Collections Archive at McCain Archive, but the hope is that we're going to continue this project for at least several more years, and our hope is to keep digitizing pieces of it and get it up on the web. Another good example of that, in addition to the yearbook from Innsbruck, is General Hafner's papers, which we have this massive collection of his papers that we are really interested in getting digitized. The problem is, of course, or the challenge is that that's a very painstaking process. It takes a long time, and it quite frankly, it takes a little bit of funding as well. But I mean, that is something that we are committed to doing going forward. But we'll actually make a note of that document, and we can move that up into if we think it's important.
and we also have to double check with some of the published materials. It takes a little bit longer if they're copyrighted. We actually have to check the copyright permissions and make sure that we can digitize them. Even if they're available other places online, sometimes we can run into kind of that stepping stone that we have to get through before they're digitized as well.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
The next we have no question, but great job, young people.
Oh.
And that is from Kerrigan, thank you. And then Sean N. McCraw asks, how do you decide what documents take priority for digitization?
So this collection was unique in many ways because part of it was a already born digital project. We had some materials that had already been digitized by the Unit Association and their members. So we automatically took those into account and put them up on the website as we had them. The process of actually deciding what's in our archive right now in order to digitize them in is partially based on what people have requested. So we have had people reach out and ask about specific documents that have not yet been digitized. And if we have a lot of requests for those, and it's a document that's very easy to access and we can easily find and digitize that in a short amount of time, that moves up the priority list just a little bit because we can get to that document and do that in a timely fashion. One of the other factors as well that has been part of that digitization process is just ensuring that we have the time to digitize the documents. Some of the collections are longer than others, and so going into the archive, it usually takes two of us to go in there and do that digitization process. So we have to make sure we have time in our schedules. We have to make sure that we can devote that to the project. We're not trying to prioritize documents based on what we may think is important or based on just arbitrary means, but it really does have that request factor in there as well as the time that it takes and the process there as well.
We have one comment and a question in the meeting chat, but one more question in the Q&A. This may have already been covered, but I'm assuming that the Dale Center will always have someone maintaining the website, considering that the current writers / content managers will eventually graduate, much to Dr. Zelner's, please keep on forever. But I'll get out of here and move on to other things. What is the long-term plan for this project?
So I think the long-term plan is that it's a wonderful opportunity for graduate students as they go through our program to gain these really important digital humanities skills, right? So, I mean, I'm very hopeful, and I know that Sarah, Jimmy, and Nick will all graduate and go on to wonderful careers, but there will be students behind them, right? As well as, quite frankly, faculty behind them. I mean, we made a commitment to the association in 2015 when they moved it here that, you know, the archives at Southern Miss would, you know, the university libraries would always preserve those documents, and we and the Dale Center made a commitment to keep that website going, which is quite frankly why in 2022, when we realized that the older website was simply not up to snuff anymore and we couldn't update it, that we had to start this new project for the new digital humanities project with the website at kind of its center. So I mean, the wonderful thing about universities is that even though people move on and graduate or even retire, for faculty, there will be someone behind us. And the other great thing is we have a wonderful group of donors who have given money over the years and set up endowments. So we know that even the funding that helps, for instance, pay these grad students for their work during the summer on this project will continue to be there, right? And it makes me almost want to get a little bit to my donor piece, which I thought I would leave till the very end, but I will make a pitch that if you have documents, if you have photographs, if you have other things that have to do with the 103rd, we would love to get those. So on the webpage, there is actually a donation page that talks about how to donate both archival materials and also how to make a monetary donation, which could help, pay for the students, the student interns who are working on this in the summers, pay for some of the digitization that needs to get done. And so hopefully, if that is something that you have materials or you have an interest in seeing this going, that you will consider doing. But I mean, when we made this deal, when we made this commitment in 2015, we meant it, to be something that would continue on as long as the university was certainly here. So that was kind of the plan at the time. It's a great question.
And that's also something we considered heavily as we were designing this updated website as well. We really chose a platform and multiple storage solutions to ensure that the longevity of this project would be safe in the future, that we would be able to maintain these documents, and that this website and updates were available long-term, that it wasn't something that would become outdated in the future and would not be able to have the platform have any more updates supported.
Yeah, and even the digital documents are held in several different places on several different servers. So if it was something to happen to our servers here, they are also safe in other places. So that preservation of this stuff, of this great material, is really important to us and to the project. So, other question?
Yes, and this leads actually directly into the next question. Do you have an active interface with the National World War II Museum curatorial staff in New Orleans that also has an ongoing digitization project?
We have connections certainly with the World War II Museum. We know several of the folks there. We've actually trained several of the folks there in some of our graduate programs. We also have really close connections with the Camp Shelby Museum just south of Hattiesburg, the Mississippi Military History Museum there. We are not specifically working with their digitization project. We are actually working with the digitalization project out of University Archives here, which is the kind of the home to the Mississippi Digital Library, right? MDL. And they have an entire digitization shop over at university libraries, and then we've also been doing some, as Sarah mentioned, in-house. For instance, she and Nick actually went over a few weeks ago and digitized that ASTP roster because it was something that we got a request for, and we were able to do that quicker than getting it on the DigiLab's very long list of things that they're working on. So we're not really working closely with the digitalization lab at the World War II Museum, but we do have really close ties with them and work with them quite frequently. I mean, we've had several grad students who've done public history internships in New Orleans with the museum. So.
We also have a comment. Thank you, Dale Zelner, for your tremendous work with our 103rd archives. I can put you in touch with several children and grandchildren of the 409th of the 103rd. This is from Patricia Loft House, former treasurer of the 103rd.
Wonderful. We will definitely follow up. especially probably Nick, since he's writing a thesis about that particular company or that particular regiment, excuse me. And would love to get any additional materials that we can. So we really appreciate that very much. And we're very excited about this project. We have been since we kind of restarted in 2022. And I mean, I personally this summer probably spent too much time working on this a little. I've got, I'm supposed to be doing 17th century New England as well, but I got really captured by, for instance, I helped write the new webpage about the general officers for the division. And there were many times this summer that Sarah walked into my office when I should have been doing my own work, and I was instead deep in the history of World War II instead of into the history of 17th century New England. So I think it's something that pretty much everybody that's worked on it, and I will say that there was a team in 2022 that was actually different, and you can see their little profiles up on the webpage. Dan Ward and Brian Valmont worked on it in 2022. Everybody who's worked on it has really enjoyed doing that work. I guess all the way to the bottom, to the project team. Yeah. Yeah, so this has both current and former people who have worked on the project are listed on the project team website. Yeah. So we appreciate all the support that we can get, really. Any other questions?
This is Patricia Lofthouse speaking. I somehow lost the video. I don't know why, but I was the former treasurer, as I wrote in the chat, of the 103rd Infantry Division of World War II Association. And I am just thrilled of what you've done with our archives. Thank you so much. I'm a librarian by profession, and I know how much work this is. And my mind is blown by what you've accomplished. Secondly, I'm also a documentary film producer, and I recently completed a documentary about the 7th Army, of which the 103rd was a part. And so I would like to share it with you because it includes several soldiers of the 103rd. I am a daughter of the 103rd 411th Infantry Division. My father was a soldier there in Company G, as well as my half-sister's father, who was killed in Klimbach, France. And so that story is...
I was going to say, what were the veterans' names?
James Connelly, Cunnally, was my father. And my half-sister's father was Dennis Zaboth, Zaboth.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll share that link with you.
Yeah, we would love to do that. I mean, one of the things that we're planning on doing this summer is expanding, as Sarah mentioned, the photography exhibit, but any links that we can get to actually film would be wonderful, because I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is trying to engage students. Another plan that we've had is perhaps putting together like lesson plans that teachers could use to use this material with their classes. And one of the ways we know that we can really grab students is video. So any videos that we can have that have 103rd soldiers or coverage of the battles that they were in, I know would be wonderful for teachers to kind of grab those students in before they set up some sort of assignment or research project based on the website. So that would be wonderful. We would really appreciate that.
I would also like to ask, I do have the email list of our members who are currently active in the 103rd Association. And if you could communicate with me via email rather than just Facebook, that would be very helpful, because I'm not very good always checking my Facebook. And so I can give you my email address, and that way we could disseminate information about the website to the membership.
That would be wonderful.
Sorry.
We had an older email list that we've actually put into constant contact, and we've tried to use that. But if you have an updated list, that would be really wonderful, because we've always been a little suspicious of that older list, in that a lot of those emails might no longer be active. So yeah, so
that's true.
that would be wonderful. Sarah will, I'm sure, will probably contact you about that within this week, definitely.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for coming and for all of their interest and help in this wonderful project. We very much plan on having it continue, you know, over the next several summers at least. But I think there is enough here. There's enough material here and collections here to keep it going for a long, long time. And it's wonderful training for our students, and it really does a wonderful job in many ways of you know, that original mission that the Veterans Association had, to not let these memories die, to keep this story alive in many ways. And so we're really happy to be playing a part in that. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming, and we wish you well. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at dalecenter at usm.edu, and we're happy to answer questions. And thank you so much for your attention. Have a great day. Bye.